Today, we're going to dive into one of the most profound passages in the book of Romans. It's a bit like a divine legal drama, really. It involves a marriage, a death, and an incredible new life. And it all revolves around one central, perplexing question.
Think about this for a second. How is it possible for a sacred, lifelong commitment to come to an end, not because it was broken, but because it was perfectly fulfilled? That's the fascinating puzzle the Apostle Paul tackles in Romans chapter 7, and we're going to unpack it together.
So, to even begin to understand the answer, we first have to get our heads around the powerful metaphor Paul uses to frame his entire argument, the unbreakable bond of a covenant marriage.
Now, a covenant, it's not just a contract that you can tear up or find a loophole in. In the biblical world, a covenant is a life-binding relationship. It's a solemn oath that fundamentally defines who you are and who you belong to. By its very nature, it's meant to be permanent.
Paul kicks things off with a legal principle that everyone in his original audience would have immediately understood. He writes in Romans chapter 7, verse 1, that the law is only binding on a person for as long as they're alive. This whole idea of jurisdiction, the domain where a law has authority, is the absolute foundation for everything he's about to say.
Okay, so how does this legal idea apply to the nation of Israel? Well, they found themselves in a really unique and profound covenant problem, a problem that was going to require an equally profound solution from God. You see, back at Mount Sinai, Israel didn't just get a list of rules. It was so much more than that. The nation entered into a sacred marriage covenant. God himself, Yahweh, was the husband, and the nation of Israel was the wife. And their marriage charter, the very terms of their relationship, was the law, the Torah.
And that created the central dilemma. Israel was bound by this holy marriage. And God, because of his perfect justice and his absolute faithfulness, couldn't just decide to set the covenant aside. I mean, doing that would go against his own character. So the bond had to be honored.
So if the bond is sacred, if it's unbreakable, what's the one lawful way for it to end? Well, Paul gives us the answer using a simple, universal illustration that anyone can understand.
The logic here is just inescapable, right? A wife is bound by law to her husband for her whole life. But if her husband dies, the law that bound her to him no longer has any claim on her. She's free. She's been lawfully released from that marriage bond.
And this is the crucial point, the key to the whole thing. Within the framework of covenant law, only one thing can lawfully bring a lifelong jurisdiction to an end. Not good intentions, not trying harder, not just agreeing to part ways, only death.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter, to God's astonishing, perfect, and frankly, completely unexpected solution to this whole covenant problem.
In Romans chapter 7, verse 4, Paul reveals the stunning climax. He says, "You also were put to death to the law through the body of Christ." Now listen closely to how he words that. It wasn't the law that was put to death. It was you.
And this distinction is absolutely critical. Paul is so careful to protect the character of God's law. The law is not the villain here. It's holy and righteous and good. The law didn't die. Now, what happened was the believer's relationship to the law's jurisdiction was severed because the believer died.
So how is that even possible? It happens through a mystical yet legally real union with the Messiah. When Christ died on the cross, those who belonged to him, in a very real sense, died in him. This was a genuine covenantal death that legally satisfied every claim of that old marriage bond, bringing its jurisdiction to a complete and lawful end.
But this death, this isn't some tragic ending, not at all. It is the necessary doorway to a glorious new beginning, a new and a much better marriage.
You can just see the stark contrast here. That old union, the marriage under the law, well, it ultimately exposed sin and it produced what Paul calls fruit for death. But the new union, our union with the risen Christ, is animated by his Spirit, and it's designed from the ground up to bear fruit for God. And the purpose for all this freedom is just beautiful. As Romans chapter 7, verse 4 continues, "We died to the law so that you may belong to another, to him who has been raised from the dead." This new marriage has a glorious goal, that we might bear life-giving fruit for God.
So let's be perfectly clear about this. God did not divorce his people from the old covenant. That would have been a breach of his own faithfulness. No, instead, he engineered a death and a resurrection. He lawfully ended the old marriage so that he could flawlessly begin a new one.
So the profound truth of Romans 7 is this. In the person of Jesus the Messiah, God has faithfully and lawfully ended the old covenant marriage through a representative death.
And this amazing act clears the way for a brand new, living, spirit-filled union with the risen Christ, a union that produces real, lasting, and beautiful fruit for God.